Welcome, everyone, to lecture number 3 on several important Muslim empires that will be quite dominant between about 1500 and 1700. We spent some time in our previous lecture talking about the intersection of religion and politics in the context of the Protestant Reformation and many of the wars of religion in Europe starting in the 16th century. Now we need to understand the intersection of religion and politics as regards the spread of Islam and the development of several major Muslim empires. The faith of Islam expanded rapidly in the centuries after Muhammad's death, as Arab Muslims fanned out across the Mediterranean and into portions of North Africa and even Europe. And so over time, we will see a development of a number of Muslim-dominated societies, and we want to talk about 3 of those today. We'll start with the Ottoman Empire, and then talk about the Safavid Empire, and then go on to the Mughal Empire in India. We'll begin with some common characteristics of many of these Muslim empires. Perhaps most importantly, they were religiously based. All were ruled by a Muslim-dominated governorship class, but the populations were incredibly diverse across these large empires, many of them not only linguistically and ethnically diverse, but religiously diverse as well. Each of these empires also ruled over incredibly large amounts of territory. The Ottomans, for instance, dominated the entire Middle East as well as territory in Eastern Europe, while the Mughals ruled over the complete Indian subcontinent. As a result of ruling over so much territory for so long, these Muslim empires were quite cosmopolitan in nature. They had to govern peoples from very different backgrounds, religions, languages, and so forth, and they were culturally incredibly diverse. Another common characteristic of these Islamic societies is they developed into politically centralized states by force. Simply put, they were the result of conquest and domination, usually at the hands of a military elite. As such, they are often referred to as gunpowder empires because, like their European counterparts, they incorporated guns into their traditional weaponry as they conquered these territories. Many of these empires had their wealth based in agriculture and their possession of huge amounts of land first, and then also because many of these empires were based around major trade routes, trade and commerce became a vital part of these empires' wealth. Now we'll start to get specific. We'll discuss the Ottoman Empire, which really arose when the Seljuk Turks began to fall from power as early as the 12th century CE. The Ottomans began creating a fearsome empire due to their effective military organization in what we think of as present-day Turkey. And they will truly become a major military and cultural force after 1453, when Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, or Mehmed II, took over the city of Constantinople, bringing an end to the Byzantine Empire. As for its political organization, the Ottoman Empire was ruled by a figure known as the Sultan. The Sultan was a hereditary, non-religious political position, but he enjoyed quite a bit of power. The Sultan was oftentimes advised by his Grand Vizier. Think about this as sort of a prime minister. And the Sultan would often consult as well the Divan, which is a kind of a council of nobles. Local governors then ran the various provinces, but all of these individuals were ultimately answerable to the Sultan, and things flowed definitely from the top down. And this being a military-dominated empire, the role of janissaries will become quite important in supporting the ongoing political power of various sultans. We'll talk more about janissaries in just a moment. As for life under the empire, the Ottomans were divided into a class of ruling elites who were ethnically Ottoman Turks and spoke Ottoman Turkish. And they had special privileges, they did not pay taxes, and they owed their existence and allegiance solely to the Sultan. Slavery was an important part of the Ottoman Empire. Slavery was not based on any sort of racial divisions or even ethnic divisions. And what we're going to see is the development of the devshirme system in the Ottoman Empire. And this will be a practice of typically raiding areas of southeastern Europe, think Albania, think Bulgaria, areas like that, for Christian slaves and bringing them back and training them in service of the Ottoman Sultanate. Many of these Christian captives were taken from the Byzantine Empire and became part of the so-called cool class. They converted to Islam and they were exceedingly loyal to the Sultan and his government. And in fact, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, they will form the backbone of the Janissaries, which is the Ottoman slave military. These Janissaries would be given an extensive education, not just in military matters, but in intellectual matters as well. In fact, these trained Janissaries often were able to speak, read, and write in at least 3 languages. They were able to understand the latest developments in science and industry, and many of them, of course, excelled in army command as well as in close combat skills. And believe it or not, slaves in the Ottoman Empire could reach the highest levels, eventually some becoming grand viziers, military leaders, bureaucrats. Under Suleiman the Magnificent, for instance, Damat Ibrahim Pasha rose to become grand vizier for 13 years. As for the remainder of the population in the Ottoman Empire, known as Rhea, 90% of the population were those that were taxed, and these are your artisans and merchants and farmers. But no matter your class, there was a strong religious component to the Ottoman Empire. They operated under Muslim religious law, Sharia law, and Muslim academics and theologians thrived underneath the leadership of various sultans. Despite its all-Islamic leadership class, however, we will see other religions actually prospering underneath the Ottoman Empire. There were numerous Jewish as well as Christian groups living underneath Ottoman rule, and they were allowed the free practice of their faith so long as they paid their taxes and obeyed the law. Indeed, the Ottoman Empire actually served as a refuge for many Jewish populations fleeing Western Europe, fleeing the persecution that they were receiving at the hands of the Catholic Church, for instance, during the Inquisition. In fact, not only were they able to secure their safety, much of the Ottoman Empire's trading and commerce were carried out by both Jewish as well as Christian residents within the empire. But again, all power flowed down from the Sultan, the most famous of which being Suleiman the Magnificent. It was under his rule that the Ottoman Empire reached its height of power and influence during the late 15th and early 16th centuries. Through 13 different military campaigns over his 46-year reign, he doubled Ottoman territory by successfully pushing the Spanish out of North Africa. He pushed into southeastern Europe, taking the cities of Belgrade and Budapest. He made a move for the heart of the Austrian Empire, even. He conquered Iraq and Iran. Suleiman also earned the nickname the Lawgiver for developing a legal system in the Ottoman Empire with laws based not only on the Sharia or Muslim law, but actually on imperial law as well. In other words, he introduced a non-religious set of laws that coexisted with Sharia law under his rule. He also implemented a law code that applied equally to everyone, regardless of their religion, regardless of their class affiliation. He eliminated the death penalty. He basically will help to streamline the legal code and modernize it under his rule. Unfortunately, after his death, we'll see a string of sultans who were far less effective at governing the Ottoman Empire successfully. In addition to these political problems, we'll start to see some economic challenges that the Ottoman Empire will begin to face by the 16th and 17th centuries. Over time, for example, cheap silver and gold from the Americas and the increasing importance of New World trade between Europe and the Americas began to undercut the Ottomans' monopoly on the east-west trade routes. We will also begin to see rising military threats to them closer to home from Russia and the Habsburg Empire in Europe. And we'll see that a population increase within the Ottoman Empire by the 18th century led to rising inflation, rebellions, and military mutinies, all of which will ultimately fatally weaken the Ottoman Empire. So that by the time we get to the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had become, in the words of Tsar Nicholas of Russia, the, quote, sick man of Europe. And we'll be returning back to the aging Ottoman Empire later in this class. We'll move now to the Safavid Empire, which basically took over control of what we think of as the Iranian plateau in the heartland of Persia. And one key difference between the Safavid Empire and the Ottomans to their west was their sectional differences. The Safavids were a Shia Muslim-dominated empire, whereas the Ottoman Empire were Sunni-controlled. One of the most important leaders of the Safavid Empire was Shah Abbas the Great. Abbas is what we would call today a very driven individual. Weak leadership, including that of his own father, had allowed a series of tragedies to occur in his early life. His mother was murdered, for example. His older brother Hamza was killed as well in 1586. So Abbas, by the early age of 17, was already beginning to push his father aside and immediately seek revenge for the conspirators that had decimated his family. He believed in strong leadership, and that was what was needed at the time to unite this empire that was marred by a tremendous amount of intertribal fighting. Similar to the Ottomans, he also created a standing professional army of slaves and allowed them to rise through the ranks after showing merit. He also modernized his military, equipping his men with firearms. And by 1622, he and his troops had successfully fought the Ottoman Empire to the west and recovered land that had been lost to them during earlier times. Abbas's reign also marks a peak of Persian artistic achievement. Under his patronage, carpet weaving became a major industry, and fine Persian rugs began to appear in the homes of wealthy European burghers. Abbas welcomed foreigners and non-Muslim subjects to his court, and he took an unusual step among Islamic rulers by allowing Christians to wear what they wanted and allowing them to own their own home and even to ride horseback. He enjoyed discussing with foreigners the complexities of religious ideologies. While he was quite tolerant in a cultural sense, in a religious sense, ultimately, his paranoia and fear were things that crippled him, and he was not able to adequately train the next generation of leaders to take his place. He was so worried about training the next generation of leaders to become effective, strong individuals that he worried that they would turn that against him and take away his own power. So after he dies, we see a massive power vacuum develop in the Safavid Empire. This leaves them vulnerable to external invasion from the Afghanis, the Ottomans, and even the rise of European militaries. The next great Muslim empire was that of the Mughals, centered in present-day India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Islam had long since come into this region since the 10th and 11th centuries, and by the time we get to the Mughal Empire, especially under the leadership of Akbar the Great, we will see a consolidation of power in the northern regions of the Indian subcontinent. We remember Akbar for several advances. His empire tripled in size due to his powerful army. He was an effective administrator. He, too, showed a remarkable level of religious and political toleration towards people from different backgrounds under his rule. For instance, he granted freedom of worship to the Hindu majority over which he ruled, even encouraging them to build Hindu temples. He employed them in the military and administrative roles. Indeed, some Hindus made it to very high levels, including his minister of finance. He personally helped to blend cultures as well. Through his many marriages, he had 36 wives of various ethnic and religious backgrounds. He was a busy guy and was very interested in different faiths. He actively encouraged a synthesis of religions between Islam and Hinduism. He even built a hall of worship where different faiths were invited to come together and debate: Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists. Several other Mughal leaders felt the same way, and as a result, we see a great flowering of scholarship, literature, art, and architecture under Mughal leadership. While they flourished culturally and financially for a while, though, eventually the Mughals, after Akbar, began to suffer from a lack of leadership. Religious tensions began cropping up between Hindus and Muslims. Unfortunately, that's still not resolved to the present day. Then add into the mix the arrival of foreigners, first the Portuguese, then the French, and then most significantly the British, who will begin coming into the Indian subcontinent in the 18th century to exploit these internal weaknesses and take control of the region.